We've got 3 Hitchcock Village chairs in the shop that need a little bit of repair. And it's really some simple work. There's some loose spindles across the bottom. The backs are in good shape. They could use a touch-up, but the customer just wants to do a glue-up. And really the purpose of this video is to show you the proper way to make these repairs. And let me show you what we're not going to use. We're not going to use a screw gun. We're not going to use screws. And we're not going to use a nail gun. The simple repair for this is going to be to pry open the joints a little bit, take it apart if need be, but then use hide glue to do that reassembly. So stick around and we'll show you the right way to repair these chairs. The first step in tackling repair is understand how the chair is assembled. So the first thing we'll do is we'll look at the seat of the chair. And the legs do not come up through the seat, so we know that they're not held in place with a tenon and a wedge. What it does tell us is that these legs are glued down into the underneath of the seat, and then these cross pieces are glued in place. So we've definitely got some loose pieces here. There's some dried glue on these edges that we're going to need to clean up. But now that we know how it's assembled, we can start to take it apart. And my first step is to use some vinegar. And what I will do is I will put vinegar in a syringe and then squirt it into the holes. And if there's hide glue in those holes, the vinegar will soften that hide glue. It does look as though somebody used some regular PVA glue on these and it didn't hold. So hopefully they didn't use a lot of PVA and we'll be able to get these legs apart pretty easily. So let's start the disassembly process. So now using the vinegar, I'm going to squirt that down into those joints to hopefully try and soften up any hide glue that's in there. And the vinegar will not damage your finish. Now, if this was an oak piece, we'd need to be a little bit careful because the acids in the vinegar can react with the tannins in the oak. But these are clearly maple, so the vinegar is not going to have any impact on that. All right, so now we've got the vinegar in there. And then I'm a big fan of using spreader clamps. So I personally use the Jorgensen clamps. They're not a sponsor, so I'm not going to say that you should go buy them, but they work very well for me. And by reversing them, I can start to pop the legs apart a little bit. That leg is good and tight, so that one's okay. So what you don't want to do is put a lot of stress on the joints because then that's what will break the chair. So you just gently put it across and you spread open the joints, and if it comes apart, great. If not, if it just pries it open a little bit, then that's okay too, because then we can shoot some vinegar down inside. But that one's tight on that end. This end is definitely loose. So I'm going to keep working on these joints to see if we can get them apart. So one of the most important things when doing a glue up is you want to make sure that all the old glue has been removed. And you can see here, there's just a little bit of glue on here, a little bit of glue on here. And we're just going to take a file and go through and file that off. Now, one of the things you'll notice, this one actually has a chip out of it. And it's not a big chip. There's plenty of glue surface on the other side of the chair, so I'm not worried about filling that in, and the chip is probably actually inside here. So we're going to clean up the old glue. Again, we're going to use some files, and being extremely careful not to change the profile of the dowel, but just enough to get any of the old glue off. So it's as simple as just coming across and getting yourself some fresh wood, and that'll be more than enough for the high glue to be able to adhere to it. You also want to look inside the actual dowel holes themselves to make sure there's no excess glue in there. And there's a little bit, so we'll take a chisel and go in there and just pop that stuff out. So here's a much better angle of where you can see that glue. And I'm just using a rounded chisel. You don't have to. Whatever kind of chisel you have to get in there to clean it out will work. And it doesn't have to be perfectly clean, but you want to get as much of that old glue out of there as possible. And you can see it's breaking apart pretty easily. So just as an example, you can also use a small square chisel to get it out. And if you had complete access to the hole, you could actually use a Forstner bit and just drill out the hole and clean it out a little bit. We don't have that access because this is so tight, but it's going to be good enough for us to be able to get in there, get the old glue out, and then be able to make our glue joint. All right, I'm going to go over and I'm going to do the other dowel holes, make sure they're clean, and then we'll start the glue up. I wanted to show you this one. This one had a lot more glue in there, and doesn't necessarily want to come out just by simply using the chisel, so we're going to use a mallet. And you can see how it's just chipping right out. Remember how I said that I thought there was a piece missing from over here, that it might be still in the hole? There it is right there. So when we line this back up, it'll go right back in that hole. So I'm going to use my chisel and my mallet and clean up the rest of this glue. So the dowels and the holes have all been cleaned up, all the old glue is off and ready for glue up. The only thing that I use for glue up in the shop for any chair joints is hide glue. Now I do use the Type-On product, and one of the tricks that I find, because it can be a little chilly in the shop, is that I will soak the bottle in warm water just to reduce the viscosity. But hide glue is your best solution. And the reason for that is that it's reversible and it can be softened with either warm water or with vinegar. So we're just going to get that applied into all of our glue joints. Make sure we get good coverage. And then once it's all dry, once it's all set, and we actually pop them in, I keep a damp rag so I can clean up any glue drips that may be. So definitely I'm a fan of doing both sides. Type-On will tell you don't have to, but my preference is to do that. So again, we just fill up the dowel hole. Use our brush to spread it around. Get it on both sides. And then this one is going to be a little bit trickier because it didn't actually come out of the hole. It's just popped up. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our spreader clamp. I'm going to pop that open just a little bit more. Just enough for me to be able to get some high glue down in there. And then across the dowel tenon. All right. All right, so this chair is now all glued up. So we've got pressure on this rung, pressure on this rung, and those were the joints that were loose. We're on to the second chair of this 3-chair glue up. And first thing I noticed is there's a sticker on here. It says A.G. Johnson & Son Furniture Restoration. That tells me that I repaired this chair once before. So I went back in my notes to see what repairs I had done. And what I found in my notes is that this spindle and this spindle were both loose, but these two would not come apart. So clearly, with the extra strength that we had with the glue up, that the original glue joints on this failed. So that was done probably about a year and a half ago. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tackle this. I'm going to splay these legs apart to see if I can get this joint opened up, clean up any old glue, and then using high glue and a syringe, shoot some glue in there. But I am going to check all the joints to see what other work may need to happen. But I think that's going to be the only joint we're going to work on. All right, so we're going to use our spreader clamps. And again, I always use the Jorgies because I'm a fan of them. They don't sponsor me, but I do like their product. And I'm going to insert it in between the legs and just very gently see how much squeeze out I get on this leg. And you can see that it's actually coming apart pretty well. It's a gentle process because what you don't want to do is break this leg or cause this to split. And I'm actually not seeing any glue on this at all. So I'm going to tackle this a little bit more, see if I can get it open a little bit more, and I'll check these other spindles as well. So I've gotten this leg splayed apart, but I don't want to push it any further and cause it to either break this leg or cause any other undue stress to the chair. But by spreading it out, what I have been able to do is right in this corner, see if I can zoom it in for you. I've got a little tiny gap right there that I'm going to be able to get my syringe in there and shoot some glue. And there is no glue on that joint. If there's any in there, it's going to be at the very bottom from when it was first manufactured. And if it was hide glue, then when hide glue hits hide glue, it will reactivate itself. So that's what we're going to hope for. But I'm going to lather this up with hide glue and then also use my syringe and shoot down into that hole that you can just barely see. That is right there. So again, I have my hide glue and my syringe. And one of the things that I will do is put my bottle of hide glue into a tub of hot water just to increase the viscosity, warm it up a little bit, so that it will get a little bit warmer and spread a little bit thinner. But it does not affect the holding power. All I've really done is soften it a little bit so that it will come through and flow through the syringe a little bit easier. So get my cap on. I clearly got a good amount of hide glue into that joint. So now we'll lather up the tenon on this stretcher. So we're going to get some good glue contact there. And then I'm a firm believer in cleaning up your glue as soon as it starts to squeeze out. That way you're not cleaning up a mess later on. There we go. There's some good glue squeeze out. That tells us that we got a good amount of glue in that joint. You can feel the pressure from the suction. Now we'll just clean up any of that excess glue. And that looks to be in good shape. We've got this chair glued up now. And if you remember a few seconds ago in this video, I was using a spreader clamp to clamp it all together. My preference, however, is to use pipe clamps to do the glue ups. But whenever you have round splayed legs, it gets extremely difficult to have a clamp sit on that angle. So I've been experimenting with some glue up jigs that I've worked on, and this is just a simple 2x4 block of wood that I cut 245 to create a triangle in, and it sits perfectly on both sides. My objective, however, is I don't want to hold them while trying to fight with the clamp. So my first trick was to try and use some Velcro, but I'm still experimenting with this prototype to see if it's going to work. So far so good. It's got a good tight glue squeeze up, but I have to find a way to fasten the clamps on there without using like the rudimentary Velcro piece. But I'm going to keep working on that. But this chair is in the glue up phase. All the other spindles are tight. So now we're going to move on to chair number 3. Right, we're on to chair number 3. And this one has a little bit more going on. Right off the bat, I know I can see dowel here. I see dowel here and a little bit here in the back, but this has been repaired because I can see some PVA glue in here, which I never like to see. But we're going to tackle this one. We're going to mark which of the joints we know for sure are loose. They're going to need some help. So we know this one. We know this one. This one's a big old maybe. Oh yeah, that's a definite. But this one, I'm not so sure. I'm going to chip away some of the PVA glue on this to see if it loosens up. But let's get the spreader clamps and see how far we go. All right, so let's try this one first. Ooh, interesting. This spindle has been repaired. Let me bring the camera over so you can see it. So I want to be a little bit extra careful on this one. As you can see very clearly that that has been repaired before, which makes me suspect to start moving around with this thing because I don't know how good that repair is, because that was a pretty good sized break. All right, we're going to have to do some extra care when we tackle that spindle. So apply the spreader clamps on this. It doesn't seem to be loosening, so I'm going to leave it alone. I'm going to have to call that out to the customer because I'm not sure that she is aware of that. And I'll put a detailed note in my shop log as well. All right, so let's try the back one. That's good. We'll try the side one. right, that's definitely loosening up. Let's see if I can spin this so you can see. So that one's definitely loosened up. Now we're going to tackle this one and see if that loosens. It might just be a 2-joint repair on this, which would be nice. Yep. But that's all she's going to be. So I think we're going to be able to do the exact same thing. Shoot some hide glue in there and then get the clamps on this one as well too. So it's clear, I was able to pry this out a little bit more. And it's clear there's definitely some glue on here that we want to clean up. So what I will use is a file to just come across and bring that back down to bare wood. Being careful not to change the shape of the leg, just enough to give me some fresh wood for the high glue to adhere to. Now I've got a couple of different files that I use. This one is very fine. This one is a little coarser, but it's a little too thick for this. So we're going to keep staying with this and just clean that up. Also right here, there is a little bit of glue caked up that what we'll do is we'll clean that out. I did check the inside of the dowel hole and there was very little of any glue in there, so I'm not too concerned about it. If any, there's some at the very base. But we're just going to chip off the remainder of this glue and then move on and do the exact same thing to the other joint. And then we'll get a repair done on this. So we popped this one out and you can see why chairs fail. The manufacturers put very little glue, if any. So we're going to clean that up just like we did the other one with a file, and then we'll glue this chair back together again. So just like the other chair, we're going to use the hide glue, and we're going to fill up this dowel hole. Make sure we've got a good coverage within the hole, and then come across the dowel itself. All right, so now we have good coverage on our 2 glue joints. And the only time you'll see me use a hammer on a piece of furniture is to gently tap pieces back into place. I'm a firm believer in why cause more damage if you can avoid it. That came together nice. All right, so we got our glue joints in. Get a paper towel with some water. We'll clean out what little squeeze out we have so far. And now to clamp it up. So you noticed that I put little blue pieces of tape on the spindles because it's very easy to get confused when you're back and forth with the chair in terms of what needs to be glued and what doesn't need to be glued. So we know this joint needs to be glued and that joint. So I'm going to come across this way. And I'll start with my spreader clamps. All right, that tightened up nice. And that held together nicely too. Again, coming back, getting rid of any excess glue drips that might be there. And now we need to clamp this joint. This is why I like the versatility of these clamps, because you can use them both ways, both as a spreader and to squeeze together. All right, that's good. Now, the one thing you want to be careful of when you're gluing up chairs is when you're playing with the legs, it can cause the chair to start to wobble. So the work surface that I have is a piece of melamine that I know is true and flat. So now with the legs glued up, I can check, and there is absolutely no rock to this. If there was, what I would do is I would put a weight on the seat to kind of level it out and then let it glue up like that. But we're in good shape now. We've got the clamps on, we've got it all glued up, and we will just wait overnight for this to finish. And then we'll give the chairs a nice wipe down and a coat of wax. So these 3 Hitchcock reproduction chairs are complete. We tightened up the legs on all 3 chairs, gave them a nice wipe down, a coat of wax, so they're ready to go back to the customer. When we started this video, we specifically said the things we were not going to use. We were not going to use a screw gun or screws or nails to do any of the repairs. And if you noticed, we didn't do that. If you're going to be making repairs to a chair, please don't use any metal fasteners, because that just compromises the integrity of the chair. Use hot glue. There's a video on my channel that talks about which glues to use when. And whenever you're doing a joint on a chair, especially for legs or for back splats, use hide glue. It's what the antique furniture makers would have used. It's what the current manufacturers of furniture use. They don't use PVA glue or epoxies, or especially that polyurethane glue, because it just doesn't do it justice. And also it makes it more difficult if you ever have to repair the chair. So check out that other video I have on my channel about which glue you use when. But I appreciate you tuning in. And if you're not already a subscriber, please subscribe to A.G. Johnson & Son Furniture Restoration.